welcome to Chess Openings Explained. I'm your instructor, Nick Risko, and tonight we're going to be going over the Vienna Game and the Vienna Gambit. We're going to see how much we can get through. This one may be a two-parter. But with that being said, let's just jump right into it. We have e4, e5, and the Vienna is characterized by this move, knight to c3. And this move may seem a little interesting to some newer players. Normally, if they have a coach or someone who's teaching them how to play, they'll tell them to play knight f3 and target this weak pawn right away. However, knight to c3 is also a good move. Some may say it's a little more passive, but this is actually a pretty good move if you're trying to break open the center very early on. Some of white's plans may include bishop to c4, pawn to f4, breaking open in the center with rapid development and quick attacks. From here, black has two main options by developing either knight to the center. So we'll go over each of them in depth, but we'll give a little overview right now. First, we'll take a quick look at knight f6. And from knight f6, you can get the Vienna Gambit, which is pawn to f4. After pawn to f4, white is giving black the option to take in exchange for a strong center and rapid piece development. So let's take a quick look at what happens if black takes. After black takes, white kind of wants to take a look at black's position and say, your knight is a bit vulnerable here, and play e5 right away. After white plays e5, there's really only one good square for this knight to go, and that is to undevelop and go right back to g8. And from here, white can continue with normal development, knight f3, pawn goes to d6, and here there's a couple little small moves where white can go wrong. First off, white does not want to take this center pawn. You might think, well, we just lost a pawn, I just want to get it back by taking on d6, but this can actually have white hurt themselves. The bishop can take on d6, and now even though material is looking fine for white, yeah, you're down a pawn, but this f4 pawn is weak. This bishop developing to d6 will help anchor this f4 pawn, and also, more importantly, helps black develop their pieces. And this is not what we want as white. We're trying to maintain every little edge we have, and giving black some free play with his pieces isn't going to help us. So instead of taking on d6, what white will do is play pawn to d4, and black will often take. They're up material, they want to trade off pieces, this is fine. And again, white needs to be careful here. They can't just take on e5 with the pawn because of queen takes d1, and then knight takes d1. Let's say white wants to make sure they can castle later. Knight c6, bishop takes f4, you get your pawn back from the beginning. And then after bishop e6, black really does have some development here. Knight on c6, bishop on e6 are really going to let black get some control over the position. They're going to castle queenside, where white still needs to develop. The bishop can't go to c4 anymore, so it might go to b5. They may castle kingside, but in the long run, this isolated king's pawn is going to be a big target that black is going to hit. So taking back with the d pawn, I can't recommend it. So what do? If you can't take back the pawn, you might as well pin it. Pin it with the queen. Queen pins the pawn to the king, so they cannot take on d4. Obviously, the queen can't take on d4 because of the knight. So black is going to struggle with this e5 pawn. So now I'm going to give the viewers a little chance to see if black can defend this pawn, or if they can't defend it and should focus on something else. Okay, so for those of you who say you should give it up and focus on something else, good for you. There's a couple problems if black tries to hold on to this pawn. So let's go over the tries one by one. Let's imagine they go f6 and they push the f-pawn, trying to protect e5. This goes against Ben Feingold's rulebook, never play f6. It's just horrible for black, and we'll see why here in just a second. White will just take on e5 anyway, and if the pawn recaptures, there's many moves that white can play here. They can take with the knight, they can take with the queen, but I really like bishop takes f4, just saying, hey, your pawn's actually hanging, this is still pinned, I'm going to take it on my next turn and wipe you off the board. So f6 doesn't work here. What if they try with bishop to d6? Well, very similar story, you just take on f4 and the pawn is hanging, and you're going to take e5 next. Okay, well, if you can't do that, so let's take a look at knight c6. Story doesn't change. Bishop takes f4, but here you might notice, you know, what if black takes on d4? It looks like they have 3 attackers, and white only has 1 defender. So what if the knight takes on d4? And this is actually a blunder for black, all because after knight takes d4, queen takes d4, there is bishop takes e5, a very potent move here. The queen is still on the king, so there's a lot of discoveries. The bishop is pointing at the queen, so the queen has to move. And let's say the queen moves to safety. Let's say the queen goes to b6. There is bishop takes g7 check. The queen is attacking the king, and the bishop is going to win the rook in the corner. So this knight to c6 idea also does not work. I believe those are all the main tries black can have if they want to try and hang on to e5, but again, it's just not the best idea for black. Black really needs to focus on their piece development and their piece activity. So you're more likely to find black playing a move like bishop to b4 here. After bishop to b4, they're pinning the knight, kind of loosening white's control over the center. Then after queen takes e5, queen e7, white should not just trade into an endgame. This can actually lead to some problems. So let's say queen e7, knight e7. Now bishop to, it's white's move, rather. There's bishop f4, you get your pawn back, but bishop to c3, these doubled pawns, they can be good or bad, but it's better to stick with something more flexible as white. You don't want to commit to a pawn structure like this, which can easily go wrong. Instead, white just has a simple bishop takes f4, developing another piece, keeping control in the center. If the queen takes, white can take with either minor piece. Here is actually just forking some pawns. So this line with accepting the gambit, probably not the best try for black. So that was just our little overview of the knight f6 and the Vienna Gambit. Obviously, there are other lines black can play that we will go over in a little bit. The other move black has is knight to c6. And after knight to c6, you get the Vienna Game. There is no gambit. White isn't going to go for f4 here. And the reason is that after f4 and e takes f4, white does not have this e5 push anymore. Tempoing a knight. In fact, black can just try and take it right away. Here it doesn't exactly work because of queen e2. You need to protect the knight, and there really is no great way to do it. Once the knight moves, you hit with d4. Sorry, once the queen blocks, you can play d4. And black just kind of gets their pieces out there. Trading off the queens is going to help benefit black because white is not up in development compared to the other positions. So you don't have e5 here, so f4, not the best move. Instead, white has the very sharp bishop c4. And let's say black is just copying their opponent. A lot of beginner players will copy their opponent thinking it's a great idea. But here, if they go bishop to c5, this leads to a very, very tough position right away. And this is what is known as the copycat variation. And white can win or get a close to winning position right with queen to g4. I'll let this position sink in for a little bit here as I pull up my notes. Okay, so queen to g4, what exactly is happening in this position? The main threat is the g7 pawn, and there can be some problems for black if they try and focus on other things. Let's say black wants to keep copying their opponent's strategy and move their queen as well. They go queen f6. Yeah, you're protecting the pawn, but here white has a very, very cool move. I really like this move. It is knight to d5. You're hitting c7, you're hitting f6, but in return, you're letting black capture on f2 with the queen. And this is not mate here because the queen is not on d1. After black takes on f2, the king goes to d1. And slowly, black may start to realize, oh, hey, the queen is hitting g7, the knight is hitting c7. How do you protect both of these? Not to mention, if black plays something very passive, let's say they try and go g6 to protect the g-pawn, this blunders right away because it traps the queen. You have knight to h3, and you'll notice the entire f-file is controlled by pawns and minor pieces. Every single square on the f-file. e3 is protected by a pawn and knights, so the queen can only go to d4. And then after queen to d4, there's the move d3, and there's no way to stop c3 from coming. So the only move black really has here is to move the bishop to b6 or e7. And then after bishop to e7, the queen comes to f3. Queen f3 puts on some pressure. You're looking at knight takes c7 and a discovery. And also knight g5, just sinking the knight into the position can also give white a very promising position. Okay, so if black cannot play g6, what does black have here in the copycat variation? You have a couple tries, but the main move is king to f8. You have to protect g7. You don't want to lose a rook. It's much better just to lose the pawn on c7. Here, white continues with knight to h3, hitting the queen. And here black has this in-between move, an intermezzo, or Zwischenzug, where they can play h5 and attack white's queen. Now, trading queens here in this position probably will not benefit white. They might still have a better position, but this queen is so close to being trapped, you want to maintain that for as long as possible. So instead of going something like queen f3 or queen g3 where you can get your pawns doubled, white will just go queen to g5 and say, hey, my queen is safe here on g5, your queen still has to move. And here there's 3 tries for black. Only one of them gives black close to even game. The first try can be pawn to f6, trying to attack the queen again. Here the queen goes to g6, and after rook to h6, there's a very tactical move, knight e7. White is threatening checkmate on f7. And yes, they're hanging the queen, but don't forget, this entire time black's queen has been hanging. So if rook takes g6, knight g6 comes with check. The king cannot go to f7 because of the bishop. So after the king moves, then white takes on f2, black takes on f2, white takes on g8, and here white just has a very promising position. The knight and bishop are close to the king, kind of keeping them tied in. Black still needs to spend moves to develop the light squared bishop. White has rook to f1, d3 very quickly, bringing the bishop to e3 possibly. Very easy development for white. So f6, I don't recommend this for black. I just want to be clear, I don't recommend the copycat variation for black. But what's another try for black here? They can try bishop to e7, attacking the queen right away, but there's just knight takes e7, and white is winning here. There's no way to recapture and threaten the queen again, and the queen is still hanging. So you may think you have queen to f6, but here just trade and then take on, c8 or c6 maybe. Either should be fine. You're going to go up a piece. So if f6 and bishop e7 don't work, the only move left really is queen to d4, bringing it to the safe square early. Now here white can still try pawn to d3, but here there's bishop e7, counterattacking the queen. And the key move for white to remember here is to go queen to g3. If they don't go queen to g3, they can run into some problems. Like if knight takes e7, I played this in a game recently while preparing for this lecture. You can't make this trade. After the knight takes back, Black really starts to get their pieces developed, and without your knight on d5, you lose a lot of the pressure in the position. So you have to remember queen g3, and after knight f6, you can go pawn c3 attacking the queen goes to c5, and now, in the spirit of this Vienna opening, instead of capturing on c7, going for little pawns, you're going to keep going for the piece activity. And here we see white go rook to f1, keeping an eye on the f-file. The knight shouldn't really take after bishop d5. F7 is really weak, and if you play f6, well, queen g6, and you're going to be threatening mate. And if you have to play knight d8, if your opponent makes you play knight d8, you're not having a very fun time. So we'll go back. That's pretty much it for the copycat variation there, where the opponent goes bishop c5, copying white. So instead of bishop c5, what should black do here? There's a couple different options. We'll start off with d6. It kind of reminds me a bit of a Philidor position, except your knight is on c3 instead of f3. And here, white can just play pawn to d3 and have a very easy time developing. You can go bishop e3, you can go knight to g to e2, castle kingside, play for an eventual f4. Very easy development, and the plus is that white's bishop is outside of the pawn chain, where black's bishop is inside of the pawn chain. So d6 has some positional drawbacks, and the plan is very hard for black, or it's not as easy as white's plan. So instead of d6, black can try knight f6, and this one also is a very serious move for black. Here, if white's not careful, they can find themselves in trouble, but play shouldn't be too difficult after pawn d3. And here, black has a decision to make. They can play bishop to c5, or they can play knight to a5. The idea with knight to a5 is you're hitting the bishop, and if white moves the bishop back, black will easily get the bishop pair. And again, in the Vienna, white's just going for piece activity. So they go knight g to e2. They allow this trade of pieces, getting a weaker center pawn. And after bishop to c5, black gets some piece activity. White can castle, d6, looking to develop the bishop maybe to g4. Queen to d3, kind of protecting this c4 pawn, overprotecting the e4 pawn. After you move the bishop, you'll have your rooks connected, so queen d3, nice centralizing move. Bishop to e6, attacking the pawn. And now b3, just solidifying everything, kind of telling black their bishop is not great on this diagonal, staring into a wall of pawns. Black will castle kingside, and this position is equal for both sides. Black has the bishop pair, but the position isn't really open. The light square bishop is black's theoretical good bishop. It's on the opposite color square of their pawns. However, white's pawns control all of the light squares. So if black can trade off some pawns, this may prove well for black. If they can't, white can go in for a quick kingside attack after something like king h1 and f4. So that's the knight a5 idea, just getting the bishop pair right away. The other idea is bishop to c5. And before, bishop to c5 wasn't great because of queen g4, but now with the knight on f6, this is no longer possible. So white needs to look for a better move. And here they can go, they can go pawn f4. Pawn f4, they can strike in the center, and now if they take, some of these e5 ideas may come back into play in the future, but here, just bishop takes f4, keep developing quickly, is going to do just fine for white if they take. That being said, black doesn't take often. They play d6, try and keep their center strong, looking to develop the light square bishop to g4, where it can tempo the queen, and castle kingside. The main move is knight f3. That way, if bishop g4, it doesn't come with tempo. And here, black has two options. The first option they have is bishop to g4. And after bishop to g4, we get some very interesting ideas. This can lead to a very sharp game. I'm going to show you this very fun line here. Knight to a4, kind of the same idea in the previous line where black goes knight to a5. White is just looking to get the bishop pair. and enjoy a nice space advantage after a move like f5. Bishop to b6, knight takes, the a-pawn takes, giving the rook an open file. Castles from both sides, pawn to c3, and now you'll notice this kind of looks like an Italian or a Spanish pawn structure, except the pawn's on f4. f4 is an idea you might see in both of those games, but d4 is another push to consider. So to avoid this possibility of d4 needing to choose which way to capture, black captures on f4 immediately, bishop captures on f4, and now knight to h5. Knight h5 is just tempoing the bishop, so you have to move it. And now after bishop e3, black plays knight e5, and we get this very heavy decision for white to make. This knight on e5 is hitting the bishop on c4. It's hitting the knight on f3. This knight is, of course, pinned, and this bishop is just one of white's very nice attacking pieces. So we need to take a moment to look at the position and decide which move is best to play. Do we try and reinforce our bishop? Do we try and reinforce our knight? Do we do something completely different? And the position gets very wild after white takes on e5. But Nick, what's happening? You know, this pin that's been happening, we're going to lose our queen. Well, let's take a look at it. After they take our queen, we have 3 pieces that are targeting the f7 pawn. So here, the knight, which is attacked, it would make sense to capture with the knight. You attack black's queen, and the black king can't move. If you try something like queen d7, then knight to e5 is going to win the queen. So this means black has to take with their rook. And after they take with the rook, rook takes f7. I'm giving this move an exclamation mark. If you don't play this, it's going to be more of an equal game. But there's a lot of threats happening here. So first, king is on a light square, bishop's on a light square. So white is threatening multiple discoveries to win the queen. So any queen move is going to lose almost right away. So if you go like queen to c8, rook c7, king is in check, they have to move, and you win a queen. After they recapture, white wins the bishop, and here white is up a piece and pawns. They're going to have a very happy time. The only move that really doesn't, I guess there's 2 moves that don't follow this. There's king h8, walking out of the discovery, but after rook takes d1, white has more than enough piece activity. This knight isn't participating in the game. This rook, while it does have an open file, has no targets. And then white can look at swinging the rook over and threatening some back row checks. The other move that doesn't really follow this is queen to b8, where there is no rook discovery to win the queen. And here, again, white just takes on d1, and they have more than enough compensation for what looks to be a strong piece that's actually not doing anything for black. So this bishop to g4 idea, while sharp, can lead to an equal position. I think I missed the main move. I can't show this variation and not show the main move. The best move here is pawn to d5. And it looks very interesting. Black looks like they're going down material and they're just giving up a pawn, but it's very, very important to disrupt the coordination of the bishop and the rook. Now black has 2 threats, taking the bishop and the rook. White just takes with the bishop, but now we see the black return this sacrifice. The queen takes on d5, pawn d5, king takes rook, rook takes bishop. And here, in this present moment, it looks like white is winning. It looks like white has 2 extra pawns. But let's not forget, when the knight took on b6 ages ago, it opened up this file for black's rook, and it gets to take on a2 for free here. Now, you have to play rook b1, so you protect your pawn. And now, after a move like knight f6, white is still slightly better, but now black is getting some counterplay. And if you're a much stronger rated opponent, or stronger rated than your opponents rather, you may have chances to outplay in this endgame. So that is bishop to g4. The other idea here is knight to g4, and one of the only master games I believe that has this move is Frank versus Kroll. It ended in a draw in 2001. Knight g4 was played, followed by knight to g5. White is putting more pressure on f7, and you'll notice in a lot of these lines, f7 is a key point that white is trying to hit upon in black's position. Black castles, the rook will help protect f7, and now pawn to f5. This is, again, another example of cutting off the coordination of the pieces. So now this knight is hanging, and black has this in-between move here. Bishop to f2 check. Can't take it with the king because it's protected by the knight, so you have to go king f1. After king f1, there's knight to e3 check. And here, black will win the bishop pair. So again, if black can trade off pawns, it may serve well in the long run. But here, white can have a very strong attack after pawn h4. Just rushing this pawn up, trying to wreck black's pawn structure. Bishop g5, hg5, queen g5. Another pawn sacrificed to open up the position. And we see rook to h5, tempoing the queen. We see queen to f4 check. And now, instead of going queen f3 and trading off, that would not help white. We see king to g1. And here, the engine gives white almost +1 because of this crazy pressure on the king side. But if you're strong, if you're black, you're strong, you can probably survive this and try and win in the endgame. Let's say black tries to go for castles. This move is a little dubious. White can just play f5 and kind of clamp down on the position, make it very hard for this bishop to develop. And that's really probably the only other try that black has in this position. White can try something like, I guess it's black's turn. There's a couple tactics here with knight to d4. Sorry, there are no tactics that exist. I was getting my coordinates mixed up. But knight to d4 and sinking the knight into the position. This position can be promising for black. Maybe worth a look. Okay, so we're going to go back. That covers the knight f6 lines here. And that really covers the bishop to c4 ideas. White also has another very interesting way to play with pawn to g3. So one of the drawbacks of knight to c6 is that it can be very slow. You're not putting immediate pressure on white's center as if you would with knight to f6. So white can adopt this slower, more positional style of play with g3. They're looking to go bishop to g2, and in these fianchetto lines, it's really going to be a fight over the d5 square. White is going to try and clamp down on the d5 square and prevent black from breaking with pawn to d5. So here we'll normally see bishop to c5, hitting the weak f2 square, bishop g2, and while black can play d6 here, try and open up the path for the bishop, this can run into knight a4 and just win the bishop pair right away. So if you care about your bishops, you may not want this to happen. So most players at the master level will play a6 here. That way, if you run into knight a4, just bishop a7, you keep your bishop pair, you keep this pressure on f2, and play these positions. So after d6, a6, knight g to e2, white is going to continue these kind of standard development ideas. You'll see the knight go to e2 in a lot of these lines. They're going to try and build for an f4 break after d3 and castles. Again, this is going to be tough to achieve with the bishop on c5, so after castles, king h1 is going to be necessary at some point. Now we see black play d6 because they couldn't do it earlier with knight a4. White goes pawn to d3, opening up the path for the bishop, and it would like to go to e3 naturally. However, if you go bishop to e3 in the near future, black can trade, and then you're going to have these doubled pawns in the center, which, while not a bad thing, it's not great. White really wants to go for this f4 push and break open the position. Black will develop the knight, not going to f6 because that would run into bishop g5. It would be a very easy square for white to develop the dark square bishop to. So they go e7, and after castles from both sides, this is a very equal position and probably a great position to play if you feel like you can outplay your opponent. There aren't too many things to worry about, so if you just are a better positional player and can outplay your opponent, this is a very good position to go for. And then I probably should mention that after knight to c6, I believe I talked about f4, but yeah, if they take after knight f3, standard development, e5 doesn't exist. This is fine for both sides, but black may have some more pressure than normal. Okay, and then I believe I talked about d6, but that might have been in a different position. So instead of the knight moves, if black tries pawn to d6, bishop to c4, again resembling a Philidor pawn structure. After knight to f6, pawn to d3, white will just have very fine play with normal development. And that covers, I believe, all of the knight c6 lines. So we'll jump back into the meat of this with knight f6 and go into the Vienna Gambit. If black isn't careful, they can easily be overwhelmed. So again, if they take pawn e5, the knight has to go back, knight f3, d6, pawn d4, take, you pin the pawn, maintain your pressure in the center, and then you win your pawn back and trade off queens, and you have a fun endgame where you're developed and your opponent is not. So black can't really take there. Now what happens if they try and defend the pawn? Well, let's start with the direct pawn to d6. After pawn to d6, knight to f3, knight c6, just developing the knights for both sides. White has bishop to b5, stopping the knight from jumping into d4, and encouraging black to play bishop d7. And now pawn to d3. This is going to resemble a bit more of those knight c6 plans that we went over earlier. So now what if we try knight c6 to save the pawn? Here, this is actually very bad for black. The refutation is f takes e5, and after knight takes e5, we get what's like a Halloween gambit, except we didn't even have to sacrifice the knight. So for those of you who don't know what the Halloween gambit is, it's in the 4 knights, where white will sacrifice this piece and play d4, hoping for a massive initiative. Here we see that kind of idea after knight to c6, but instead of having to sacrifice the knight, we just get this position by trading pawns. So here after knight g6, pawn to e5, this knight has to go back to g8. And after knight to f3, white just has a very nice big center. Knights are developed, bishops are going to come out, castle king side or queen side, and white stands much better here. So that was knight c6, and let's say instead of knight c6 they go bishop d6. Some beginners might try and protect the pawn this way. This goes against the general principle of blocking your center pawns with your pieces. You generally don't want to do this. But here it also doesn't work tactically because pawn takes, and if the bishop takes, white hits them with d4. And there's nowhere for this dark square bishop to go. There's a bishop to f4, bishop to g3, both of those are protected, and after bishop to d6, white can just play pawn to e5, forking the pieces. And if queen e7 to pin the pawn, then white can just go queen e2, unpinning the pawn. This threat still stands, and white is going to win a piece. So the Vienna Gambit, after f4, black can't accept it. Black shouldn't defend the pawn. What are you supposed to do? Well, you play d5, strike in the center, and you want to try and get your development out this way, try and bring some very sharp combat to the scene to counteract white's aggressive attack. Here, the main move is take on e5. You're going to misplace the knight. The knight is going to go take on e4, and now queen to f3. There are other moves that white can play here, like knight f3 is fine. Taking is kind of equal, but I like queen f3 because it introduces pressure right away to f7. And if they take on c3, you have the option to take with either pawn or the queen. Here we do have a bunch of moves from black, so we will start with knight to c6. Knight to c6 looks like a very natural move. You're going to come and take on e5, and this really leaves white with only one option here, is bishop to b5, pinning the knight. You have to pin the knight, that way it can't take, tempo the queen. Here you'll see knight takes c3, d takes, you're opening up the path for your bishop. Queen h4 check, g3 to block the check, and queen to e4. And here we do have two options for white. We have the move queen takes e4, which was seen in the game Adamco Febi in 2009, and that was black winning, but the position here, black is only slightly better after this main line, where black will take on e4, bishop develops to e3, white is ready to castle. Bishop d7, bishop takes, because now that the pin is broken, the knight could have taken on e5, so you have to trade the bishop for the knight. Knight e2, g6, looking to bring the bishop to g7 and hit e5. Castle's long. Bishop g7, again, trying to go for this pawn. Knight d4. If black can successfully take this pawn without losing the bishop pair, these bishops are going to be monsters. So you have to be able to trade your knight off for one and be able to get some counterplay on these doubled pawns. Bishop d4 will force a trade, and you want to force this trade because it will result in white having active rook placement. f5 to save the pawn, and now rook h to d1. And here we enter a rook endgame where white is down a pawn, but in exchange for that pawn, they have very, very active rooks. The rooks are going to come in on the 7th rank and try and clean up these pawns. Just being careful of this e-pawn. This is a passed pawn. This is going to be the one black is going to try to promote. But with careful play, this position should be fairly close to equal. The other move, instead of trading queens right away, is a bit of a trappy move where you can play bishop to e3 and block the check. If they take on f3 and the knight takes, this is just good for white because black is helping white develop. And here you will see white has 3 developed pieces for black's 1. So the real trouble comes if black tries to start taking these pawns on the queen side. Here in this position, white will develop with knight to e2. And for example, if black just tries to take these pawns, they are losing on the spot after castle's kingside. We can't forget that we've allowed this f-file to open, so this introduces mate threats. And if you stop the mate with bishop to e6, knight to d4 is going to put pressure on c6. It defends the bishop from the queen and puts pressure on e6. So imagine white can just take, black takes back, and queen f7 check is going to be annoying. So those are 2 different ways for white to play. The other move in this position after queen f3 is pawn to f5. And one of the games that features this, this line is Carissa Yip versus Justin Wong in the Southwest Open 2019, so the most recent game. And black won this game as well. But white does here is hits the knight, trades off the knights, and plays d4. Sorry, black plays d4. If black plays something like e7, or sorry, bishop e6, then pawn to d4, and white is going to enjoy a space advantage, nice pawn chain, something that this pawn structure is like a Winnower French. So black has to play d4 to avoid this. d4 is a bit of a slow move from black, though. After pawn to d4, white punishes black for their slow play by playing queen to g3, and it makes it extremely difficult for black to develop their bishop. And here, there's 2 different move orders to get to the same position, but knight c6 is the more popular move order here. After knight c6, there's bishop to e2. This bishop is going to make its way to f3. It's very important that you don't put the knight on f3. That is the most important diagonal for this bishop. And you have to bring the bishop there first, because otherwise, if knight e2, you just block the path for the bishop. Bishop e2, Now bishop e6, developing, bishop to f3, queen d7, and now black is prepared to castle queenside. Knight to e2, and now pawn takes c3. We can let this sit here as white. This pawn will be a target for a while. So instead of focusing on taking this pawn back right away, we just continue developing the pieces. Bishop to e3, knight to b4, attacking both pawns. You have to go rook to c1 to save the pawn. And here, black is slightly better. For some more beginner players, you might be wondering why they can't take on a2. And the reason for this is bishop takes b7. And white will get some counterplay. After rook to b8, queen to f3, protecting the bishop. And you can sacrifice this, this rook here because of this pin. You will pin the queen to the king, winning the queen, and having an interesting material imbalance. So that is another way for black to play. They can play f5. But the main line here after queen to f3 is knight takes c3. And there's multiple ways for white to capture, but the capture I'm going to recommend here is b takes c3. And again, the idea is you're going to play d4, get this nice space advantage, have a nice strong pawn center, easy development. So bishop e7, getting ready to castle kingside, pawn to d4, and now castles from black. Black can also try for an early c5, but if they play c5 before they castle, white can just go bishop d3, pawn to c4. This bishop goes to f5 and trades itself off. Queen d7, trade the queens off, and after knight e2, we enter this endgame where while material is equal, white has this space advantage. It's pretty easy to get the pieces out, like a4, bishop a3. The knight can go to f4 and hit d5. So that endgame could be equal for both sides, but I feel like white stands slightly better. So black should go for castles. And now bishop to d3. After bishop to d3, we have three very interesting continuations. The purpose of bishop to d3 is to put pressure on h7. And we'll show why this is important. So let's say black plays what looks to be a natural move. Looks like bishop e6 is completely fine. You're protecting f7, protecting your center. This is great. However, this introduces the idea of queen to h5. And this may look fine at first. You can play g6, stop the mate threat. Queen goes to h6. You might have ideas of bishop to g5 and f6 in the future. You can't do that right now because of the queen and bishop, but you're going to run the h-pawn down, sacrifice the h-pawn with some big mate threats, something resembling the French defense gone wrong in the Winnower, or some ideas in the Dragon with the fianchettoed bishop. You're going to run this h-pawn down and sacrifice it. So black's best idea is to try and kick this queen out right away. So they do it with rook to e8, and then after knight f3, bishop to f8. Now queen to f4, more pressure on f7, and after c5, knight to g5, white does have a very promising position. The computer is putting it white at about +1.5, some positions +2. And again, the idea is just rush your h-pawn down and rip open black's kingside. Instead of playing bishop to e6, one try black has here, which can lead to a forced draw, is pawn to f6. So pawn to f6 here is an idea that you can see in the French sometimes whenever they try and attack the head of the pawn chain, trying to rip open the position that way. And now if we see queen to h5, black has pawn to g6, and now bishop takes g6, hg6, queen g6, you run into a draw by repetition. So king to h8, queen to h6, king to g8, queen to g6. This is your forced draw on move 13. Okay, let's say you're playing black and you don't want to go for the forced draw. You're trying to win this position. Well, after bishop to d3, you should play pawn to c5, trying to get your space on the queen side. You're not necessarily going to try and capture. but really just try and clamp down the position where white is going to have space on the king side, black is going to have space on the queen side. Here, knight to e2, and after c4, this bishop is not really trapped, don't worry, just bishop to f5. And now bishop takes, queen takes, and you'll see another queen exchange. And here we end up in another similar position, similar endgame, where white will have the pressure on the d5 pawn, black will start to have pressure on the queen side after possibly running their queens up the board. And this is probably one of the better tries for black, is to go for this endgame, which is equal, only giving white plus 0.2 or 0.3, depending on the depth. But that is pretty much the gist of e4, e5, knight c3. That is almost everything possible in the Vienna for those lines that I recommended. Some of black's best tries. As you can see, there's a lot of very strong attacks, some very natural looking moves for black that are just complete blunders. So if you are black and you play e5, this is definitely an opening you're going to want to study and look for those traps, make sure you're not going to fall for them. And as white, I would really recommend this opening for blitz, just because there are all these traps black can fall into, and they can give some very interesting positions. But that is it for the Vienna Gambit. This is it for Chess Openings Explained. I want to thank everyone for stopping in. We're going to move over to Twitch for some tactics. We'll see you over there, and I'll see you next week for the openings.